Brian, thank you for taking the time today, man. I'm excited to hear
Of
more about
course.
PressBox and dive into everything you guys are building. To start, kind of give us the rundown on who you are, and for people hearing about PressBox for the first time, talk about what the company exactly is and explain a little bit about what you guys are doing.
Of course. I'm Brian Hough. I'm the CEO and co-founder of PressBox. PressBox started out of a problem we saw at Bleacher Report. So my co-founders and I spent a combined decade there building out the personalization and publishing tools that powered the TeamStream app. RIP to the old TeamStream app, by the way. And we saw what originally took like 100+ people at BR to deliver what was at the time revolutionary levels of personalization, what is now today still weirdly all we've accomplished on the personalized sports front. And we saw an opportunity to bring technology to both the leagues and teams, which we can talk about here in a bit, as well as media companies to be able to bring that level of content automation and personalization to their audiences that BR was able to accomplish, but not have to bring hundreds of people to try to do it, instead enabling their existing teams to be able to bring that level of personalization. And so 2 years ago, we founded the company originally with the idea that we would do that on the consumer side, met up with some folks who brought us over to the B2B side, and that's what we've been doing for the last 2 years. So we work with those two ICPs primarily to help them deploy our agentic technology to scale what we just generically call media operations across content, marketing, and broadcast with rights and non-rights holders.
Nice, man. Nice. And we hear a lot about personalization in the AI age. And for a fan or consumer, they hear it, but they might not really understand it. So from a technological standpoint or high level, explain what personalization is and how it kind of works within the landscape of the platform.
Yeah, so I'm going to get a little preachy here if you'll allow me, but
Yes, for sure.
the way that we think about it is the media ecosystem is changing in kind of two key ways. One is obviously this fracturing that we feel like we've been talking about ad nauseum, but in sports specifically, this idea that owned and operated is becoming increasingly important for these leagues and teams as the traditional media brands break down, fracture, social platforms, insert all the things we tend to talk about here. And the second is that we are moving away from this push ecosystem driven by algorithms where you're waiting for a person to go and write a piece of content and hope the algorithm serves it to this pull version that AI has brought, where now we're not relying on SEO, but instead fans are going in, typing queries into ChatGPT, and we don't have a whole lot of control out what comes out the other side. And so we view personalization as that problem as much as it is, what you tend to think about it today, which is like, can I make this show the scores that I care about, or can this only include the social posts? It's a big part of what we do, but the overall trend that we are trying to help media companies and owned and operated operators solve is this idea that now content can be pulled and not just pushed to customers. So how do we do that in a way that speaks to those individual fans? So what that looks like today is more of traditional personalization. That could be the ability to create your own personalized newsletter that's being programmed broadly by humans, but only includes stuff that is meaningful to you. It can be something like a recap of an event that changes based on your familiarity or the angle in which you care about that. So if I am a big fantasy player, that I probably want that recap to have a whole section that's about how my fantasy players did, maybe has highlights of only their things. Another example we give is if you're an avid fan of Formula One and I'm a casual fan of Formula One, how those articles that are written towards us should change. Like mine should have more explainers, yours should not talk down to you. And so how do we build the agentic technology to take what humans are already writing and help it get to different audiences by including different types of content, bringing in third-party content that is potentially speaking to you specifically? So if you're only on Instagram and you like these three athletes, then you should see those athletes' social content embedded in the story versus just what an editor decides to do for the general audience. And so that is a lot of what we are trying to enable, the ability to do that for the types of content that you receive, the modality of the content that you receive. So that's a huge part of our story, is not just, hey, everybody could write the article and we could change some parts. You may not want to read it. You may want to hear it in audio. You may be wanting to give it a newsletter digest once a week. You may want to read every single article on it. We are trying to not just be the content personalization, but how you get that content. So if you have a fan that just wants to listen to it on the commute into the office, you can speak to that fan easily in just the same way as somebody who wants to read it in email or read it on the web as they're having their lunch. And then it's obviously about where you reach that audience. That can be the time that it happens. We do a lot of what we call in the moment personalization. So if you're a big fan of Steph goes on a tear in the game, how do we make that moment yours and get it to you and not necessarily to everybody who may or may not care about Steph? That could be the language that we deliver it in. A lot of the leagues that we work with are obviously in multiple countries, and a lot of the leagues we work with even here in the US are wanting to expand into multiple countries. And so how do we find ways to internationalize this, not just like stick it in Google Translate, but like what changes, what is the unique context for the sport in that particular country or language, and how do we bring that to the table? One of our partnerships is with the Sporting News, where we do this well, where we're able to help them produce content in a multitude of languages across their editions and be able to have it speak to that unique audience while still scaling from a team standpoint.
Yeah, no, appreciate that context. It's super interesting. I think one of the things that's so unique about sports is it's so emotional, and storytelling is such a big component of the
Yes.
ecosystem. How do you think about balancing the technological piece, the automation, with authenticity and maintaining that
Yes.
emotional component within the storytelling and the content?
That is a huge part of what we're trying to solve. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you we figured out every single aspect of how to do this well. There is a line that I think that you're seeing just be drawn generally with users, in which where they're okay with AI content and where they're not okay with AI content. Our platform was built in mind with the idea that a human could then write what they thought was good and then be able to scale that, whether that's curation of content, and that's part of their job, whether that is the creation of an individual article. We want them to continue to use the platform to tell stories. We just want to change the scale in which they're telling stories. In a very similar way, I often draw parallels to what it's like to be a software engineer right now, which I have been for a long time. We have had to get less precious about these particular code we write, but then change our job to look at ourselves like, now we can ship entire products. And what does that change about our role? A lot of the organizations we're working with today are viewed very similar. If an editor was writing an individual game recap, how do we change that role to where now they can tell an entire story around the game using the exact same tools? And so now we're making it simple to integrate things with highlights and photography licensing and data research. And a lot of our tools are to help a small team scale the coverage of their league, or to help a bigger media organization go much deeper in the coverage that they're already having. We view that to be core to the platform. I think the era of, data-driven game recaps that are all text, a la what you see some leagues experimenting with, are probably going away. I think they already have not really been servicing fans. They solve the unique problem of, I need to write recaps and therefore I have recaps. But if you were to talk to the average fan, they're not getting much value out of that. And so we are trying to build a platform that bridges that gap, brings the human element to be able to tell a story around that game that is unique, and uses a combination of stuff that AI is curating and the human element to make them able to scale recaps that way, for example, versus just like generating them from the data in kind of what probably is viewed now as an AI slop kind of way.
Yeah. As we're talking, obviously you've mentioned the shift in media consumption, especially when you look at the younger generations. They may not be following like the Bleacher reports as much, or the ESPNs, but they're also following like these niche creators and some of their favorite influencers. How does that factor into how you guys are thinking about the long-term tailwind and some of the opportunities going forward?
Yeah, I think it's on both ends. And so, one, we see an opportunity for our business in the creator space. Like Bleacher Report started with that as its ethos, right? Citizen journalism, and like a counter to the ESPNs of the world. And like that, we're going through a very similar shift today. Platforms like Substack and Beehive have been enabling folks within and without of sports journalism to have these individual properties, and how you get in front of those folks, or and discover those folks, I should say, is like a big part of the problem we're trying to help leagues solve. Is like, you already have all this micro micro journalism, if you want to call that, happening around your sport. We help you find that and tie it in with the parts of the audience who may care, right? Because now you can have somebody who speaks to a niche of your audience that are not necessarily working for the team, the league, the media company, but are still providing coverage that speaks to an element of fandom that you might want to have a connection with. And that's kind of where we view that. So we view one as eventually being able to go down market, if you want to call it, to be able to provide the same tooling that we're providing large organizations to smaller media companies and individual sports creators, but also to help them with distribution. It's like part of the problem we also solve for leagues is we often work with these emerging leagues who can then use our tools to get their content and coverage featured with our media partners, like the folks at the Sporting News. And so we see a similar opportunity with creators on that same front.
Yeah, for sure. When you kind of look at the broader sports ecosystem, where do you feel like media and content are still undervalued as a business driver?
I'd say with almost every league and team at this point, I think we're going through this like there was this world where leagues for the long time could rely on broadcast rights plus these large media companies to make sure that their audience was spoken to. And now you're seeing entire leagues spring up with the concept of like, no, we want to own that. I give Kings League a lot of credit here for like saying, hey, we can be the media ecosystem. We don't need an external media ecosystem. And they've been able to create that. I think you will often hear this talked about both in like sports media and I think general media, and marketing is like this concept of storytelling is marketing becoming a very, very big deal, and that everybody's a media company is probably a term everybody's heard said out loud before. I do think that's real, and I think it is not understood well enough even in sports leagues and teams today. I think the leagues and teams that understand that they have to build a true owned and operated platform from the jump are the ones that are having more success. A lot of the early leagues we're working with, Rock League, World Surf League, are building those owned and operated platforms with the understanding that like you can't rely on broadcast rights often when you're these smaller leagues, and you can't rely on the ESPNs or the Bleacher Reports of the world to necessarily cover you. And so some get it, some don't, but I think that curve is changing rapidly. And I think companies like Beehive and others are proving that that's not just a thing within sports, but just generally that like a lot of these organizations are hiring editors, building their own newsletters and their SaaS businesses or their D2C brands. And I think that is a growing trend that is going to continue to grow over the next decade.
Yeah. We hear a lot about attention spans these days, and the younger generations, they have shorter attention spans, but I also think there's this idea of like if the quality of the content is good enough, people will pay attention. For example, like the Joe Rogan podcast, like he has this long tail 3 hour long podcast and people are highly
Lex Friedman
engaged.
and his like
Yeah.
24-hour marathons.
Right. And like people are into it, So like how do you think about attention spans going forward when you think about sports related content and how media consumption will potentially look in the next like decade or so?
I I think the attention span problem is twofold. One, I think there's very much a real thing. We all feel it, right? We can't stay focused on a thing for a minute or two. But what I think long form content creators will tell you is it's all about the hook. And this is something that we figured out at BR, right? If I can find the right path for you into the story, I can get you to watch and read the longest of articles, right? You see a lot of content creators. There's a F1 motorsports creator named Tony Common Brown, and I follow a lot of her stuff. And she talks about this where she does this very deep technical dives, but she does it with a TikTok story to start, right? How do I get you hooked in and then get that story connected? Like, I think that is one of the magic things that we want to build into our platform is not just like, how do we create this long short tail content, but how do we connect the short form with the long form? Because both need to exist and both can exist, but you want to help companies figure out what is that hook that gets somebody actually willing to go and consume that. We're no longer in the era of sports where writing a 30-page article is going to guarantee you that a bunch of people are going to read it. You need some way to get them interested enough in that story to convert them into somebody who's going to engage with that lengthier content.
Yeah, really good insights. If you were advising a emerging league or team today, what would be the biggest piece of advice you would give them about the media shift that we're going through right now, and something that they can't afford to not pay attention to or ignore?
Yep. I'd say kind of three pieces that tend to lead to these early integrations that we do going well. One is starting early, build everything I'm about to say in from the jump. It is always harder to do both of these pieces if you're not doing it from the beginning. And those two pieces are the data side. Data helps tell stories, like recaps and things of that nature are a dime a dozen. Like people want to have deeper dive content, whether that's your editorial team creating it, whether that's your fans creating it. You have to have data to tell that story. And I think the second piece is like do content from the beginning, but understand what will actually move the needle for your fans. Like I almost always end up in a conversation with a league because they're like, oh, I have this person that needs to write recaps because someone feels like we have to write recaps for everything. And then that's all we end up spending our time on. And those are valid things. Like you need that data out there. You need something for people to interact with. But if the things that are going to move the needle for your fans are like pre-game previews or athlete specific breakdowns or whatever that ends up being, like do that work and put your effort there. Like you can automate some of these other things if that's not where the value is. But I think a lot of leagues don't actually talk with their fans. They just go and do the blueprint thing that they see every other league do without much understanding of if that's going to be the thing that delivers the value. Because once you build those muscles in, then that story starts to get more interesting, right? The data in the first season's like interesting game to game. There's no history, there's no records, but you're in second season. Now you have that data there. Now you have storylines together and you can tell better stories as you go. And that's what I would recommend to almost all leagues. Is like if you're getting into the content game, don't overdo it. Figure out what those one or two pieces of core things are that your audience wants and lean into it there, and then develop stories on top of that as you go into subsequent seasons, games,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah, I love that, man. And obviously you've been in this industry for a long period of time. You've seen the shifts, you've seen the changes. But I would say now we're kind of at this influx where like sports technology is really booming and taking off. There's a lot of attention for someone else who's building in this space, trying to
Yep.
navigate the sports tech landscape. What advice would you give them on how to scale a company, how to approach stakeholders and really grow in this ecosystem?
Yeah, so there are a few things. One, like relationships matter. Like people say this ad nauseum in sports, but like it's literally the only thing that matters in a lot of cases. Like you can have really cool, fancy tech. If you can't get in front of the right person and earn that trust over time, like you're wasting your time. This is not a place where you're going to cold call your way to success as you might in like traditional SaaS. And I think that's a big piece. Two, and this is probably like the question, like whenever somebody raises, you always get a bunch of people, how'd you do it? They have all these questions. Like I did the same thing. But like probably the biggest thing to come out of it is like understand that sports to everyone who does not exist in sports seems small. Like everyone thinks that the only leagues and teams that exist are the ones in the US. And so you get all these questions about the scale and TAM and the venture market. Take the time to understand how does your product actually scale both outside of the US and outside of sports, and doesn't necessarily need to build those things in from the beginning, but be like understand what you're walking into as a founder into the sports tech world. And no matter how successful you are, you still need that story for how you're going to get outside the US or how you're going to get outside of sports to be able to tell that. And I think that is a thing that I watch founders like trip over all the time in sports tech generally. I think the other thing to say, and this is coming because I also spent a good portion of my career in health tech that just got out of a pretty big boom. And the big thing I will say is like, believe 70% of the hype. Sports is doing really, really well right now, as you write about almost every week. But we also know that like 70% of that is going to work out. If we're being optimistic, 30% of it is not going to work out. And so be honest about yourself, about where you're investing, where the trends are going, make those like decisions for yourself. Following the money can be fun, but sometimes you can take yourself down a rabbit hole that you can't get back out of because one person really believed in something you didn't really realize you're signing up for. And the money is flowing into sports. It's similar to how money's flowing into AI generally without with a lot of abandon, I would call it.
Yeah.
So there's definitely like there's a lot of interesting and good things happening in sports, but as with there is a boom, there's also a lot of things maybe getting funded that shouldn't be, or like you're getting stronger signal on an idea from the investing side of the equation than you are from the market. Like in the end, you still got to sell and you still have to have customers that want value. And like that's where you should be pulling your traction signals from, even if they feel like things are really exciting in sports investing right now.
Yeah, great advice, man. Really good advice. And then for PressBox specifically, do you all would you say sports is kind of like a beachhead for you all and you see applicability outside of the industry as well? Like what's kind of the long-term strategy for the around that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, sports is where stories already are getting told. I don't have to explain to people in sports the power of storytelling in the way I might need to a B2B, a traditional B2B company. And so we see a lot of opportunity in sports. We've got a lot of great partners on the sports media side, but we see a much broader opportunity. Like I said, I think editorial and storytelling and the ability to have personalized marketing and content experiences is not sports specific. We already have some opportunities in media and entertainment we'll be able to talk about later in the year, and we see it as something we could potentially take to a B2B brand, a D2C brand, anyone who today is like jumping on what may be a bandwagon of hiring lots of editors and building storytelling organizations internally. Like that's where we see the future of the company, but we see a lot of opportunity within sports. Like it's you're not going to find another industry where you've got hundreds to thousands of customers that already understand the need to do this in order to drive their product. And so we've got a lot of opportunity. We'll continue to explore there.
Nice, man. Last few questions before we wrap up. Give us your biggest prediction, broad or specific, about where sports content looks in the next decade.
I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I hope it's powered by PressBox, but I think the biggest thing that's going to change is we are going to start interacting with content and media in a much less passive way and a much more controlled way. I don't know if the interface is going to be chat, because I think it's just what we have today. But this version of tell me what happened in sports that just comes back in the way that I care about, like that's the level that I think AI is taking us towards, not just in sports consumption, but just in media consumption generally. We're sick of the algorithm. Like, yes, I could personalize it some on Instagram, but the reality is most people probably want some version of a filter that they control, that they can just say, let these things in. And I think that version of media is finally possible, and that's what's going to change. I don't know what the output's going to ultimately look like, but that's what we believe is changing.
And then for PressBox, what does long-term success for you and the company look like?
Riding that wave and being and helping our customers figure out how to deliver those solutions, solving all the problems that we have with them today. Call it brand alignment, factuality, all of these things that AI is like we have no control over today, right? We sign these deals with OpenAI and Claude, and you hope the output that comes back when somebody asks who won the game is like somewhat nice. Like in the future, people are going to be going straight to the NBA app to do these things, and
Yeah.
we want to be providing the tools that is allowing that to happen. It can be done quickly, it can be done factually, it can be done in a brand aligned way, and it can be done in a way that's actually interesting to fans. I think the one learning we have to take from this algorithmic ad driven era of media is that like fans may not be able to tell you specifically what they want, but they certainly don't want you to tell them what they want. And so how do we find this version that isn't just another algorithm that actually allows users to have some control without having to carry the burden of that control, right? Like not everybody wants an RSS reader is the same trend that is going to happen with this if we can't find a more passive way to help people consume media and learn about the things that they care about without having to have a human on the other side write every piece of that content and design every one of those interactions.
Yeah. Brian, man, this has been incredible, super insightful. For people who want to learn more about PressBox and also connect with you, where can they do so?
Yeah, so our website is pressbox.studio, and you can find us on most of the socials at PressBox HQ. Of
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate your time, man.
course, thanks, Malcolm. Appreciate it.